So, so just be aware that you're being recorded. Okay, Omar, so since you're on in person, what are your questions? Do you have any specific questions, or do you want just me to go through whatever questions were posted to the discussion board?
What kind of like the question, what is the form, what will be the format of the term, like midterm, the question wise, like what will be the format? It's going to be like multiple choice, or it's going to be like?
It will be both. It will be multiple choice and short answer.
Okay.
So there will be some short answers. They're not really difficult, but I highly recommend to review all the lecture recordings and to also review the slides. And I think it's worthwhile that you kind of in your head. So essentially it's open book, right? So you can essentially you can consult the slides, and you just need to formulate a response in the context of the slides. So we cannot do an in-person exam. So yeah, so I think open book is fair. Hi, Abigail.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for offering this.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for coming on. I think it just makes sense that we kind of have a conversation about it. So you're being recorded, Abigail, just that you're aware.
Okay.
So, yeah, so you will have until the deadline to actually complete the exam. You're taking it essentially at home, so you will have the possibility to consult your slides, because we're not doing an in-person exam. So from that end, yeah, it's considered an open book exam. It will be a timed exam, but yeah, so essentially you can consult your books. Okay, it will be multiple choice as well as short answers. Short answers will be according to what we discussed in class and what's contained on the slides. It will be conceptual questions. It will include the latest lecture on RCT and RCT analyses, and the concept of RCT, including concepts that have been discussed from session 1 to session 7. So all of these will be contained. Hi, Uma. Yeah. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Omar.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any other questions? First come, first serve.
And is like, is a timed exam, you say, like how many hours, 2 hours or?
It's timed, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will be ample time, don't worry about it.
Okay, perfect. And it's gonna be like on the, like you already told, like when you go through the lecture, slide and everything is gonna be lecture like week 1 to week 7, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Of course. Okay. Any further questions? If not, then let's pass the ball on to Abigail. You are number 2. And you also posted some questions on the discussion board, I've seen. Can you kind of clarify your questions? So I have here question, choice of statistical methods to assess the relationship between study variable and outcome.
Yeah, so I think that was coming up for me with lab number 6, of just when it says to, like, you know, correctly describe the relationship between the 2 variables, and just like if you could do a brief overview of like when to choose Anova versus a t-test, or just how to choose the correct way to describe the relationship between the 2 variables.
Okay, Anova and t-test is an easy explanation, essentially. So the idea is that you have a 5% p-value, right, as your threshold for significance. 5%, you will consider a difference between 2 groups as statistically significant, which, and this is important, will not imply clinically relevant or a relevant difference, practically different. I think that's a statistically significant difference, which implies that when you take random samples from two populations and you're comparing these samples, the distribution of the sample means essentially will only correspond or overlap with a probability of 5%, meaning that this difference essentially from these samples that you have drawn, the difference between those two essentially was only found due to chance at a probability of 5%, and that this significant difference is essentially really real, and that the mean of one of population one and mean of population two or population zero is essentially really different, and it's not zero, which is the null hypothesis of a t-test, right? So now you are with a p-value threshold of 5%, you're accepting a false positive rate of 5%, right? So now when you consider this for one comparison, it's 5%. If you consider this for two comparisons, it's not 10%. It actually, it is an exponential increase in your type 1 error rate. So essentially, it's actually you're running in a problem with your type 1 error rate. So for that very reason, you're using Anova, which is not doing a pairwise comparisons and basically circumvents the problem of multiple testing. So this is the term you want to keep in mind. It's multiple testing, and multiple testing inflates the type 1 error rate. So now Anova is a way around that, where you essentially test, and your null hypothesis is that no group mean is going to be significantly different from the grand mean, and the grand mean is the mean of the means of all the group means. And essentially your Anova tests only for that difference, and if the Anova is significant, and the F statistic turns out to result in a significant difference, you essentially have one group significantly different from the grand mean. And then you go into pairwise testing, and then you start testing, and then you use a Taki honest significant difference test, or you use a Bonferroni post hoc test, where you essentially adjust the p-value for the number of comparisons. So this is Anova versus t-test in broad strokes. So it's, as soon as you have more than one group, always opt for the Anova first. So I think this is in broad stroke what you're asking for, I believe. If you are trying to really look at a relationship between one variable versus another, like let's say systolic blood pressure versus serum glucose, which is one of the examples that we're doing and we have done, there you would use linear regression. So this is a relationship that you're assessing. If you have several groups and you want to have these relationships between groups, then you would go for group comparisons. And this is when you would opt for Anova rather than a multiple linear regression or linear regression. But the multiple linear regression essentially hosts an Anova within it. And we have discussed this in the classes where you see for the multiple linear regression, you see an F statistic in there. So essentially it uses the same principle, and I think this goes then into the realm of your next question that you have stated here, conceptually, why a larger R-square indicates a greater predictive accuracy. And this is where the Anova is essentially part of the multiple linear regression. We have the example of several groups that are essentially factors, and they are becoming part of the multiple linear regression. And you will basically employ principles of an Anova to these groups and to the accuracy of the prediction. And this essentially becomes then an F statistic, just like with the Anova. And the F statistic, essentially comparing the groups, is then also used in the linear regression, also is a positively skewed unimodal distribution, which you're basically testing one-sided. So you have a distribution that is positively skewed, and you're finding a critical value which is dependent on your degrees of freedom. And we have, if you remember that lecture where I went down and I basically went through the F table and I looked for the degrees of freedom and I showed you the significant, the critical value, you're doing essentially on this distribution. The critical value will indicate at which point a larger F will basically render the Anova significant. So we did that in one of the classes when we talked about the R square. And the R square conceptually means that the variance that is being explained by the model, so the regression sum of squares divided by the sum of squares total, is essentially yeah, so you basically you create a proportion of what is being explained by the model as a fraction of the overall variability in the model. So that predicted sum of squares divided by the total sum of squares. So the regression sum of squares divided by the total sum of squares.
So just one follow-up with the R square. So
Yeah.
a high R square does not necessarily mean that there are like smaller residuals or that the fitted line is closer to the actual, like that Y hat and Y are closer. It just means that the variance is more random and more explained. Like, does it mean that we're getting, does it tell us anything about the
residuals would be smaller, so the variability would be smaller.
Okay, so they actually are closer to the fitted line. If R square is higher,
yes,
it's close. And does it tell us anything about the randomness of the variance? Like, or do we have to, there's that we have to do visually by plotting the residuals to see like, oh, is there heteroscatenaty?
Heteroscedasticity. The randomness that you're referring to, so it's not a randomness, it's a stability of that variance estimate. So this is where you always have to plot this out. So you have to plot it in various ways. So you do, for example, a QQ plot. It's very kind of elegant way to test for heteroscedasticity. And so this is an elegant way to actually test for that. I also referred to some formal tests, which I'm not necessarily advising to, but I think a visual inspection is the way to do. But the R square does not essentially inform you about that. So this is not the way to go. So this would be visual inspection. And that was in, I think it was in chapter 6, right? And in lab 6, we talked about this. Or was it 5? Yeah, it was on 5. Yes? Does that answer your question? So I have, okay, great. So I have choice of statistical methods, the difference between Anova and theta is conceptually y larger R squared. Okay, so it's really this, so you basically, and this is kind of what the Toiko message about R squareds. Explained variability as a fraction of the total variability of variance. Explained variance as a over total variance. Good. Well, thank you, Abigail, for these questions. Uma, you were next. Any questions? Any further questions on the topics?
I was just hoping that you can go over like some examples of like random questions, like with like obviously different numbers or variables or whatever. Just like some of like the harder questions you think that are on the midterm that might like make us stumble a little bit, something like that. I don't have anything like specific.
Well, I do have to refer here to the lecture recordings where we have essentially talked about this in much detail.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go over some of, well, let's maybe talk about one of the, I think it's important that you understand all the well, this is maybe a good slide. Let's do this. Okay, that, to not address what you're asking for, let's maybe look, and this is something that you definitely need to understand. You need to understand all the components that are essentially in here. so this is this R brain dot, and this is from class 6. So when you look at something like this, you need to make sure that you're really very solid on understanding what each of these components mean, and all the components that are essentially here. So there will be interpretation of a linear regression model. So you need to understand what is a coefficient, how does that match into the overall picture, how does that match into the estimation of an actual individual. So if you, for example, you have a regression model, this is an additive model. So essentially you can use a regression model to essentially estimate any individual, right? So you can say, okay, so I want to have now the blood pressure for a male. So this difference of sex here essentially is the difference between males and females. And so there's 1 plus sex means that we have here a blood pressure of 228, which is this unrealistic blood pressure. But once you factor in sex, you essentially get here a difference of 0.20, 1021. So this coefficient essentially indicates the difference between the two groups. So then it becomes important that you understand which one is essentially the reference group. And this is where it's important that you understand how is that coded. So here it was males tend to have significantly larger SPPs than females. So when you look now at this coefficient, it's like, who wants to take a guess which individual is here 0 and which one is 1?
That one, the one that's there is female. If males are significantly larger or have like a higher SPP.
So which one would you code as 0, or which one would you expect to be coded as 1?
So 0 would be, that's 0 is a reference. So 0 would be male, and then 1 would be female.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Because when you look at this, you need to see in which direction that difference points, right? And you're adding everything up. You're adding everything to the intercept, and the formula, we have discussed the formula of how these regression functions actually look like. So you would subtract this coefficient from the intercept. That means that the reference group, that is coded as 0, and in the function, this would actually be the better one multiplied by the x1, and this essentially would drop out, right? So you would not add or you would not subtract this from the intercept. So only if you have coded it as a 1, rendering it the non-reference group, this would actually come into effect arithmetically. So this is important. These are the subtle differences I really, really advise you to be quite solid on. So know that stuff. But you have done it with the homework, you know all of this. So I think it really comes down to like understand what we're trying to do. Then for the RCT, for example, think rationally. What do you want to do? What are all things about? Why is an RCT being conducted? Think about what we talked about, causality. Can you establish causality? Only in an RCT, because in an observational trial, you have confounding. Why do we have confounding? What does essentially avoids this confounding? Why is an RCT avoiding confounding? So practically applied questions, right? It's applied biostatistics. And the exam is essentially testing you. Can you take that knowledge that you have gathered now over the last 7 sessions, and can you apply it? It's actually a very brilliant exam. You will enjoy it. It's very nicely designed. And Professor,
I'll have a lot of fun taking it.
yeah, well, I hope you will have a lot of fun, and I know that you guys will do well on it. So don't worry about it. Watch the lecture recordings. Go through the slides. Go through the example that were shown, that we discussed in the labs. Just make sure you immerse yourself in the thinking. I think you have like 6 or 7 days to take it. just take your time and immerse yourself in the thinking. It's statistic. It's applied biostatistic. So it's not the arithmetics play some role, but essentially it's really just think about how you will imply it down the road.
Okay, thank you.
You'll be fine. Absolutely.
Professor, I was
Yes.
confused. I thought it was due on the 18th.
No, it's being posted on the 18th, right?
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
No,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
You're fine. You're fine.
Okay.
No, next week we so essentially what is happening. Wait, let me. I do have to admit, is like I need to be very, very careful. I was traveling now for 2 weeks and was back home in Austria, so I gotta make sure that everything is posted right, because I was already, Omar caught me on the research notes. So I want to make things really nice and right. So it comes out tomorrow. It will be posted tomorrow, and it will be available until 10/24. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So
Oh,
you,
right. The research notes. I was actually wondering about that one too.
oh yeah. So the research note I just posted before, and that was where Omar stepped on my toes and said like, "Hey, where's my research note?" So that is posted now. That is
Okay.
out now, and I have extended the deadline, which I think also makes sense in the light of this exam. Focus on the exam, do well on the exam. Okay?
Thank you.
Sure. Any
So is
questions? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, is the structure of the exam mostly kind of like homework 1, or is it mostly like we have to do any R calculations that will be?
You don't need to do any coding. You will need to do calculations, but these are not our calculations. So you will not need to do coding per se.
Oh,
Thank
So
you.
it's gonna be multiple choice and short answer.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
And I have one, like, it's gonna be like format wise, it's gonna be like homework 1, kinda.
Well, that was what Kat also asked. No, it's not really. You don't have to do coding for that, but there will be examples essentially that may remind you of homework 1. Yes.
And when we start, it's gonna be like certain time, right? Like,
Yeah, correct.
I'm not sure if this would be helpful to anybody else, but I was having a little bit of a hard time running the answer key for lab number 6. So I don't know if you'd be willing just to go over a little bit of the answer key for that, or post it the knitted version of it.
You're gonna laugh, but I have also issues with that. Just knit it as an HTML. You're gonna be fine.
No, yeah, even with the HTML, I'm
Really? Oh,
with
wow.
with lab number, just the lab number 6. I don't know if it's that, like, it's not recognizing some of the variables.
The help. Okay. Wait, hold on. Data help.
And I tried saving it in the same file that I had done
Yeah.
my lab in.
That did not remedy the situation. Okay. Wait, I'm working on it. I am not on my Mac, so I'm a little handicapped here too. But I'm trying to reproduce it. Hold on a second. So we have the data help, our data help file that we need. This is not the download folder. So this is all I downloaded. Okay, so now we do this. Data help.sav. That should be in downloads, but that should be. Yes. Oh, that's actually here. Okay. Data underline help.sav. Okay, caveat here, where it means to Data help, analyze data help, RCT. Okay, so one hint is here to delete the data because so if you look at this, it will prompt you for a subfolder.
That might have been what my problem was.
Yeah, here we go. Okay, if you delete this in line 28 and the RMD, you should be able to get that knitted. Do you want to discuss it specifically, or?
I guess my main question here was the when it said appropriately summarize the outcome and study variables, and then appropriately summarize their relationship was where I was kind of, okay, but you could do the T apply or you could do the S apply, right?
Yes.
So that's like a pairwise test.
Yes, correct.
And we're doing, so why there is a pairwise test better, like just kind of back to my initial question of pairwise versus T-test.
Yeah, so again, and it comes back to the type 1 error rate, right? So the pairwise tests are problematic. And it's essentially, it is expected from a statistical point of view to do an Anova rather than pairwise testing a priori.
Okay, even though there are only two groups here, right? Because there's homeless and there's not homeless.
Yes, and this is why you can do t-test without the problem, right?
Okay, so we could choose a t-test or an Anova.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Well, here in this context here, where you test for homelessness, you essentially have additional parameters, right, which you wanna include and adjust control for the confounders. So this is what you could not do with the t-test, and this is where the linear regression trumps the t-test.
Okay, and that makes sense because you need to do the linear regression because you have all those confounders.
Correct. Correct. But for the pure comparison, yes, you could. For this here, this comparison will be absolutely identical with the outcome of the t-test. So there's no difference with that. That was I think we talked about this in class 3 or so.
Okay, and I'm gonna try to run this again now without the data, but if I still can't run it, would you be willing to post the knitted version?
No, absolutely, absolutely. So I hope everybody's listening to this now. I have not seen anybody else. I can make an announcement to that extent if you want. Well, can you run it now and let me know?
Yeah, I'm gonna try. The one other thing that's coming up is an error, like the RCT. They're saying object RCT is not found.
Data help RCT, what?
Okay, so maybe did I somehow delete that?
So essentially what you need to have the objects in the right folders. The object needs to be labeled in the right format. And yeah, and the code should not refer to a subfolder that is not existent.
I'll try running it again while somebody else asks a question and I'll let you know.
Yes, well, if there's a problem, I happily post the PDF, of course. I can run it right now and post it. I was not aware that this actually happened. And so, yeah. If we do this and we post this as a PDF. No, but the PDF also have issues here. So I'm here at a Windows computer and there seems to be some hiccups. Who had the same issue? I think one of you had the same issue. It's that the MIG text is very unsatisfying, I have to say. This is a very non-satisfying solution. But really make sure just to print it as a PDF, as an HTML. If you have any troubles, HTML should always work. So Any other questions? Well, any questions about the course per se? Any suggestions? I'm happy to also listen to all your suggestions. What you guys just really need to let me know what I can do to make it better, easier, more digestible. I don't know. You let me know. I really would like to have an ongoing dialogue. So I'm going to be back in New York, and I'm going to be New York bound until the end of the course. So this complications should have an end then that I'm behind and posting stuff. And I happily also make myself available more often. If you want to chat more often, I'm happy to come on. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Like not regarding the term, like overall. For the upcoming after the term, I feel like there is a research note. It will be really helpful if you want to just like briefly discuss like what to do on the research note or how you go and like give a guideline kind of to the research.
Well, there are instructions on the research note, right?
Okay, I didn't go through that too, but
yes,
I
yes.
will.
The instructions are very detailed. What I have them somewhere here. I thought, yeah, research note 1. So there are very detailed instructions on the research note. So it's essentially you're doing an investigation. You find based on these variables, like here, research questions. So you have an outcome variable and you have study variable. It should be an hypothesis. You kind of, and there are also 2 good examples that Professor Sang posted, and he got consent from the students to post those for future classes. So you basically you're just doing what we have done already in some fashion or form. So you basically you study outcome versus, and it's regression analysis. You have an outcome, you have a study variable that you're interested in. Then you adjust or you control for confounders, which you may think are relevant, and this can be essentially really whatever you're interested in. Maybe you have a research interest, or maybe there was something you're interested in. To some extent, it's like, be creative. It's for me personally, it's very joyful to see your creative ideas on what you want to look at. Project, it's fabulous to see creative solutions. Please, absolutely be creative. And then basically, once you have unadjusted and adjusted, you basically go through the model diagnosis. And then you write this up in like a minor kind of report.
Okay. So that could be like vary from one person to another, like it's like more personal thinking. Yeah, that's what like.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's a graduate course, right? It's like your ideas are actually thought-provoking and should already kind of shape your interests to some extent. So the ideas I would expect here from you guys is actually what you're really interested in.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Well, if not, then I would say we conclude our little review session. Post to the discussion board if any further questions.
And just one last technical question. I'm sorry about this. Lab number 7, when I open that file, I don't see the place to submit it.
No, there is no submission.
There's no submission for 7.
Oh, okay. So we just do it, but we don't submit it.
Yes, because it's at the same time with the exam and it's the same time with the research note, and it's like, so nothing.
Thank you.
Sure.
That makes it easy.
Good.
Yeah, that makes it easy. I was like,
okay, sounds good. Then I'm gonna grab some dinner, and you guys have a wonderful weekend. Good luck with the exam. Post to the discussion board if any further questions. Okay.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. And I will post this as soon as I download it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
great.